mean, this meeting has already started. So what's the background to this? Well, the Institute of Economic Affairs is a think tank, and part of our work, most of our work involves creating opportunities and platforms for people to discuss and to educate, to discuss topical issues in Kenya's economy, regional and global affairs. And the second part of that is actually to create dedicated public education on important subjects in the economy, but also important subjects in public affairs generally. And to demonstrate the reason, or rather to affirm the rights that exist to every citizen to participate in the affairs of the Republic, but more importantly in that participation to bring knowledge to that participation, because our view is that with better knowledge, obviously, the participation of citizens has more value, but also it elevates the quality of public debate and the quality of public affairs. And the final one is just basically to use research as inputs into these processes. And that kind of research is research driven, mostly social science research, but it's research driven by placing economics at the core and using economic tools of analysis in the toolkit of the economist to actually answer questions on the economy or in public affairs generally, and with the belief that obviously education and public knowledge should be raised as well. So that's the background of the Institute of Economic Affairs. We run this work under 6 programs, one on international trade, another on special programs. So international trade tracks international trade agreements in which Kenya is involved, and the region and global and multilateral trade questions. The second one is on public finance and management, which is our largest program, and here it's tracking budget policy and governments trying to bring in citizens' voices in how government spends money and some of the decisions that government makes, with public taxes on one side and the spending choices that are made. The third one is law and the economy, which is basically to create constitutional literacy, but also to see the connections between the economy and the constitution and the constitutional protections therein. The fourth area obviously deals with economic regulation, and here is how this is one of the areas. It's a microeconomics program, and one of the areas in which we question, or rather try to understand, the interface between regulations, laws the government makes and the institutions, and how those affect the operations of business and the economy generally. And the fifth area is a futures program, and the futures program uses the techniques of scenarios building and futures thinking to illuminate questions in important questions for public affairs once again, both in the private domains and obviously in the public domains more prominently. And the final one is a special programs. And in the special programs here, we are concerned to popularize public knowledge about economics and to see how economics is useful and how to understand the principles of economics and how they apply in various domains. So it's more or less like a popular economics program. And it's the one under which we are holding the discussion today. And our discussion today is on a couple of things. One, we are discussing this book. It's basically Caste. It's a book written by Isabel Wilkerson, who's an academic in the US and has taught in a variety of schools, but obviously teaches on social structure, and this is her second book. So because there are just a few of us, I think it's 5 minutes past, we should start. And this is what we will do as the Institute of Economic Affairs. The function of this book club, a conventional book club usually involves bringing in the author of the book and then asking them to explain the background to the book and a few nuggets, and then to have questions and answers go back and forth. However, we are not able to bring in Isabel Wilkerson as much as we can, but we tell you what we'll do is first say why the book, and then I will spend about 5 to 10 minutes, speaking about what I think was impressive about the book. It is not to give a synopsis, but it's just basically to say what we think, why did we choose this book, what is the content of the book that we think is important, highlight a few things in chapters, it's not to have spoilers, and then open this up for any question and answer that people might have around things that we think were impressive, what we think we might disagree with, some of the things that we had never appreciated until this author mentioned them. So that's the background. Now we don't have here we should have had a snapshot. If my colleagues can find it, perhaps it should be the background here. The cover of the book, which is a black and white page, very well done on Caste. So let me ask any of my colleagues who can find it to do that and then to project it on the screen. But let me start with Isabel Wilkerson. This is her second book, a US citizen, and I think her profile is available on the book cover. The approach that the IEA will take is that all people who attend the book club have read the book, whether you've read the whole book or listened to discussions about it, or even listened to an audiobook version. It is not to give us a chapter by chapter breakdown of what the content of the book is. It's a discussion about what we see, highlight a few things that exist, what we think are important, or what we found most impressive about the book, and then open it up for discussion. So discussion is open in every way, but the assumption that we hold as we come up here is that the book reading has happened. So let's start with this. So the book is called Caste. Some people read it as Caste, and the proper title is basically Caste: The Lies That Divide Us. She's addressing the question of the social stratification question of castes, where societies in which people are driven, or rather defined into castes with hierarchies, and those hierarchies are maintained over time. So in discussing this, in the 10 minutes that I have, I'll concentrate on 3 things. Yes, thanks. Yes, so that's a book. Thank you very much, Justice. So in this discussion, I'll concentrate on 3 things. The layout of the book is it's divided into 7 parts. It has 30 chapters and 1 epilogue. And the epilogue is basically just a summation of what she thinks the future looks like, which is very, very hopeful. And I find that very, very impressive. So you have 30 chapters and an epilogue. So in total, about 31 chapters of stuff. Not too many pictures. Actually, there are no pictures in the book itself. So it's basically one text for just reading. And my view is that it discusses the question of social stratification and the artificial divisions that exist between human beings that we all take as very, very highly for granted. And sometimes even when we're in the service of those divisions, either we do it consciously or sometimes we actually do not realize that they exist. So that's the layer of the book. I mean, 30 chapters, 7 parts, each of those parts addressing a question or one issue. So what did I find? Look, the way the book starts is very, very interesting, and it's telling me something about Isabel herself. She starts with a chapter on basically toxins in the permafrost. And this is what she says. I cannot use the imagery or the metaphor that she did, but the metaphor is interesting because she talks about the fact that sometime about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, because of global warming or because the earth is getting warmer, the ice caps, the areas in Russia that had been covered for a very, very long time with ice. And because ice thawed, there were animals that had been buried under them and of course frozen. Because of the thawing of the ice, there was a melting, and then there was a new disease that actually burst back. The spores of the disease burst back and started to infect animals and people, a disease that had not been discovered before. Or rather, a disease that had not been seen for close to 70 years. And this disease was anthrax. And the background is that sometime in the 30s, I think, one of the things that had happened is because there was an outbreak of anthrax in the reindeer and the animals in that part of Russia. So I think this is the northeast part of Russia. And because the outbreak was sudden, part of the way it solved itself is through the arms of nature or through the force of nature. It froze those animals. The spores of anthrax, the disease, which affects animals but also can infect human beings through contact with the flesh of animals, was covered, but it does not mean that they were made inactive. So as soon as the conditions for their thriving became possible again, it became structurally conducive for these spores to float again, and then there was a new infection of anthrax in that part of Russia. Fascinating imagery. And the first thing that I read from that is, wow, so she goes from talking about a social structure, but he uses the metaphor of biological processes and how these biological processes can actually unleash spores that exist, even if they've kept covered for a very, very long time, close to 2 generations. So that's one of that. So the language and the metaphors, I think, are very, very interesting for me. So her language and the way she writes, it's very easy reading. I think she's very, very eloquent in the way she writes. And the structure of her sentences, not too long, but the style shows you somebody who's, I mean, a good academic, but also writes very, very well. I think something that economists could learn quite a bit from in writing important subjects in language that is actually more highly accessible. So this is a book that anybody would read. In my view, it's a book that anybody, even a high school student, would read. And I think that is what she intended, to open up a discussion around this area. So she starts with the toxins about the permafrost, a chapter that's worth reading. As I said, I'll not be bringing in spoilers. But what is a caste? And when the word caste is spoken about, many people think that castes are actually, or rather, the traditional concept, as a student of sociology myself in college, one of the lectures that I was most impressed about in sociology was social stratification, because social stratification tells you about what kind of divisions exist in society. And often, people understand instinctively divisions that come from class. People understand that the Marxian theory is actually something that many university students understand, or at least superficially understand. Many more associate with, and many people call themselves Marxists and all manner of socialist lean thinking. So the idea that there are social structures in society related to how much income and classes people have is instinctive. When it comes to the caste system, which is basically an arbitrary classification of people and a construction of divisions of people, based again on some very arbitrary things, and we'll be seeing how what those have as she describes them, people think often that those classifications only existed in societies such as India. And you know that India has one that has been there for, some people say, about 4,000 years. How it emerged is one thing we're going to discuss for that. Very rarely do people think, and this is one of the shockers of this book, very rarely do people think that just as recently as 70 years ago, in the Great War, Second Great War that happened in Europe and also other parts of the World War II, part of the big problem with that, and she mentions that, was actually that the Nazis, which is basically the Germans, Nazis, the National Socialists, Nazis, were actually a caste system. They had this belief that the races, by general, races, are actually placed on a certain hierarchy, with superior races going all the way down the ranks to other races that were inferior. Believing that certain forms of body formations and some things classified Jews as inferior, the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, who wrote his own book trying to justify that, and his hatred of Jews was known, classified themselves as coming from an Aryan nation. And this Aryan nation are people coming from some part of India, and they were superior race by virtue of that, claiming that they are superior intellectually, but also in other forms, and therefore preferred people who should, by all means possible, actually be the natural rulers of other people. Then, of course, we had a very elaborate machinery or system that was put in place to try and put the Jews in their place. The belief was that the Jews, for many reasons, did not qualify to be German citizens, or if they were a subordinate class of people classified in that way. And it wasn't only the Jews, but the Jewish one was the most elaborate, or in my view, the most prominent that was visible to people to see at the time. So that's where we were with regard to modern place. Now, the reason I emphasize this is because when you ask people to talk about classism, it's evident, but castes are not usually considered, or people do not consider that Jewish thing, that Jewish pogrom, as having been driven by caste ideas about the very definite and permanent classifications. So that again is the difference between a caste and social class systems which are based on income. Because the social class systems based on income are basically about splitting society by virtue of what people earn. or what wealth they own. But those are not immutable in the sense that you could be from one class now and actually could transcend to others. I mean, could transcend a class or ascend the ladder into others. Caste systems tend to be permanent. I mean, when you see some of the things, the best chapter in my view in her, or rather the best series of chapters, part of this book is part 3, which talks about the 8 pillars of caste. And it forms for uncomfortable reading in my view because you classify whatever you think about as caste. You see elements of those even in societies like Kenya, and I'd like to hear what some of you think about it. And people take it as a given that to elevate themselves above other people using arbitrary classifications, which they can justify using all manner of clever language or clever dissection, gives that impression that it's far more common with thinking, and actually why class systems have endured. In fact, one of the shortest ones was actually the one that took place in Europe in World War II, driven by the Germans, and we know the consequences of bringing it down. So that is an element of it. So arbitrary classifications, construction of human divisions is what a caste is, and it becomes very, very important idea. It's all social, but it's an extremely important idea. So that is one in Nazi Germany. She says as well that the apartheid system in South Africa, she alludes to it, was also a caste system. Why? Because obviously there were also degradations. The white people were at the top, there were coloreds and other people, and obviously all the way back to black people who were right at the end. So caste systems are not as hidden, or rather, caste systems might be hidden, or we might not be conscious about them, but they are not as rare as people claim, and it is not a domain of only Southern Asia and that part of the Indian subcontinent. The other is the US. The race system, the system of classification by race in the US, which is where she actually features and actually provides the background for why she started to think about casteism and castes, is a caste system. Now, many people understand the civil rights movement and actually the slavery movement all the way back to some of the breaking down of that. But she says that caste systems are actually, people never think of the US gradation of races as a caste system. And she makes an eloquent case, including talking about the fact that at one point when Martin Luther King was himself in India, speaking about this caste system, and he had a very uncomfortable discussion with a few people from the lowest caste in India, who are called the Untouchables, reminding them that we actually feel as oppressed as you people are. And he actually saw that in their view, the structures of the caste system, which have been there for 3,000, 4,000 years in India, were very comparable, if not similar, to the ones that they saw in the US during that time. And that was quite a revelation to him. So that's basically it. So I think caste systems exist. I think caste systems exist also in some parts of Africa, to different levels. They've been maintained, but it's something that Africans do not confront as well. If you read old literature, and some of it talks about, if you read it, whether in West African places called, in West Africa, among the Igbo, I think, they are the Osus, which was actually some kind of class systems. They were a minority, by no means, but they are people who were considered unclean for whatever reason, and that sense of division was considered permanent throughout their generations. It could not be patched for whatever reason that is. So let's be a little bit more reflective. But it also tells you one thing about the power. When I read her definitions and actually the coverage, one of the things that it makes is the human tendency to actually think that prejudice and attached prejudice is not something that they themselves suffer from or perpetuate, is one of the reasons why we could have a caste system operating in societies and in Africa, in other parts of the world, obviously, and we will be completely unconscious of it or actively ignore it. So let me go to my best page, my best chapter. My best chapter is actually part 3, which covers 8 chapters. And let me just read the part that it speaks about. Part 3 covers 8 chapters, and each of them, actually 9 chapters. And each of them then deals with a few things. The first one is basically the origins of our discontents, and the discontents is basically those differences that come. And she speaks about the fact that what led her to actually see caste systems in a new way. Now, what she's saying is that a caste system has certain methodical attributes of their own, which she calls the 8 pillars. Very, very interesting. So I'll try and hash through them quickly because in my view, that's a highlight. And then we'll conclude quickly and see whether anybody has questions here. So the first thing she mentions about it is caste systems are actually God ordained, or people who perpetuate caste systems trace their origin to some divine call. So it was an imposition of a divine judgment. If you go down to Hinduism, let's start with that, not for any reason, but the Hindu culture, the Hindu tradition, it is stated that each of the 4 castes, which is basically the Brahmins, who are basically religious people, considered the purest, right, represent God's head. The Kshatriya, who are the warrior class, lower. The warrior caste, lower. Basically, warriors and rulers, right, represent his shoulders, which bears the weight of everything. Then the torso is represented by the craftsmen called the Vaishyas, which is the 3rd caste. Basically, remember, this is hierarchy. And the 4th are actually the untouchables, which are basically the last caste. The Shudra, which is the last caste. And the final ones are actually untouchables, who are not classified. So they're just below them. So the feet are actually the Shudra, and then the others are just the lower ones. And the lower castes are actually considered essential to the system, but nevertheless, they're the lowest caste and they're actually untouchable. And that's why they're called untouchables. So if you remember India's history, Gandhi called them the children of God, which is basically Harijan, but I think the name that has come out is Dalits, which comes from Bhimrao Ambedkar, who was considered the father of the Constitution of India, because he was one among the people who actually drafted that constitution. He came from a lower caste, actually the untouchable caste. He studied quite well and went all the way and got degrees in law in Asia. In Columbia, in the University of Columbia in the US. But the caste thing and the staying, if I may call it that, stayed with him throughout his life. He actually, for that reason, converted from Hinduism into Buddhism, for the reason that he found the question of caste unconscionable and actually an oppression of his people. If you come to the Nazis too claimed that, look, Aryans are superior castes, and sometimes they used questions about the Bible as God having preferences and therefore set it in the way it is. It fits well, sometimes it doesn't, but what Isabel is telling us, that the illusion of religion as the origin of castes is almost a universal feature of caste systems. The third is in the US. Even in the US, who sits at the bottom of the caste? Black people, based on skin color, and white people right at the top. There are certain gradations, but look, even in those places, people alluded to the story of Ham. You remember Noah's kids? It is claimed that one of his kids, at one time, Noah was high. Well, I have a colleague at the IEA called Noah, so I'm not referring to him. I'm referring to Noah in the books of Genesis of the Old Testament. And it is said that this was the father, he had kids, and at one time he got intoxicated, and in his inebriation, he lay uncovered. His body was bare. His 2 first sons did something that was dignified to protect his dignity. The third one did not, tried to blame him or did not act right. For that reason, he was cast, that he and his ancestors would have. He and his descendants would forever be cast and have dark stain on their skin, which is interpreted as low, black, or darker skinned people. So there's a convergence of the fact that people allude to the origin of caste systems as coming from ordained by a divine. The second feature is heritability. I'll go quickly now. Heritability means it is inherited, so that the caste system is passed through your genes, basically through the genes. So obviously, it means that regardless of what happens to Ham himself, he may have behaved badly or not, But basically that caste or that command, whether in Hindu, then remains throughout their life with the kids or the children of the people within that caste. So caste systems are also heritable. So one inherits the caste or the caste of their father or their mother, telling you how permanently locked and tight it is. The third is endogamy. And by endogamy, she says, remember, this is a classification that she herself brings into the analysis, a fantastic analysis. If you must read just one chapter, read this and the epilogue. Fascinating. Endogamy. And endogamy means that groups that are classified as belonging to the same castes and subcastes, because within castes are also divisions, all can only marry within them. You cannot try to skip by going to marry another one. And there's significant sanctions for people who try to jump across by going through this caste system. So they're very, very tightly locked. And it is clear to see why you have to make it tightly locked, because we justify it as a decision of the divine. Therefore, we cannot disobey by trying to cross those lines. Keeping that purity is important. And therefore, the only way you do that is making sure that you control the mating game, but you also control the perpetuation of castes through the purity within them. The fourth area is basically purity and pollution. Now, by here I mean purity in the sense that higher caste people are pure, people who are lower caste are polluted. You see this in India and in other parts of the world as well. One of the things that it meant is that higher caste people try as much as possible, or they are obligated to actually keep away from contaminating themselves by associations and touching caste people, lower caste people. You see this everywhere. I mean, even in the US, she alludes to situations in which some fast, obviously, marriage between people of different castes were actually even forbidden. Forbidden. And she gives the example about one time the caste system is, while there was purity and the assumption that the best people were actually people from Northern Europe, other people from Southern Europe were considered, yes, they're not as low as black people, but they're certainly not white. And they give a case, she alludes to a case in which some of you might have read, which I found very interesting, where a woman who had come from Italy, who was therefore Italian, was married to a black man. Remember, it was illegal. But when she went, or rather when she was accused in court, it was such a dicey thing that the judge actually decided that because she was not white in terms of purity, her marrying a black person did not necessarily create pollution and therefore did not by itself violate the laws. The thing about the arbitrariness of caste systems is based whether on race, and mostly sometimes it has to do with race or color, race or other subdivisions can lead to very absurd outcomes such as this, such that a law that needs to be brought together puts judges and people who are making decisions in a place in which they make very arbitrary, and laughable decisions out of that. In India, you also understand that the caste system is such that it is so, it is known that people of Brahmins must avoid the people of other caste systems, and an obligation is placed on lower caste systems to actually avoid any contact and contamination of higher caste systems, because if you do not, then you're compelled to actually have to go through a ritual bath. Ritual bath, which is basically a ritual cleansing to do that. So the biology is very bad because obviously there's no such thing. The contamination can only take place between people in that way. But basically those are necessary, those strictures are necessary to maintain this artificial artifice. To maintain this artificial structure of arbitrary classifications. Fifth is occupational hierarchy. They are called jatis within the Hindu system of caste systems. In addition to the 4 castes, there are almost 3,000 jatis, and a jati is within every caste. The Brahmins are actually supposed to be religious people. The jatis, the Brahmins who are right at the top are supposed to be religious people. Or rather priests. So they're supposed to be the priests and the guidance, priests, scholars, and the intellectuals. So they develop the ideas for society. You can tell why they justify their place. But the point about that is, those are the occupations that are available to them. Warriors have other occupations available to them. And the point about this is that besides their designation, within each caste are other what are called jatis, which is their kind of tasks that they may perform or occupations that they may perform, making it closed within a caste system. And within the Hindu system, if I read completely right, there are 3,000 different jatis, which means subcastes, castes and subcastes and all that. And everybody keeps to their caste and subcaste. So if you're basket makers, for instance, then you have to do that. If you're the people who skin animals, you have to do that. If you're the people who actually clean bodies and get rid of leather, because in the Hindu system, obviously, leather from cows is considered unclean, a Brahmin would never touch it. So basically, that has been split. In a way, that occupational hierarchy is justified in different ways. And I've seen even some Kenyans justifying that by saying that, look, caste systems are not just bad. Kenyans from different parts of the world, obviously, with orientation, but people saying that it's not bad because it allowed people to specialize through family tradition and family teaching. So basically, people try to say that it is an occupational classification and not necessarily a classification based on discrimination. Absolute nonsense, as Isabel confirms. But these are used to dress up these edifices to continue to keep this rainbow. I mean, to continue to keep this structure running, regardless of the fact that it actually has significant tensions between it. So it keeps people within specific occupations. In the US, during the US problem, I mean, during the US racism question, rather slavery area, the justification that was used is this. They say, and she quotes even a very bad man who was actually became a senator, I think in Mississippi or some part in the US South, who made the idea that there's the mud seal. The mud seal is considered some foundational structure of the house, which is upon which the house, the roofs, and everything is built. And in their view, Negroes or black people were the mud seal. This is what they're suitable for. God made them suitable for us, and therefore the mud seal. So that all the rest of us then build from what has been done by this foundation, in the sense that that is what they are fit for. Justifying using Negroes in the fields, in manual labor, because and using all manner of anthropological things to say, look, these guys feel less pain. They do not have labor. They are only good for agriculture because harvesting, and they can work for this number of days without necessarily feeling this pain, and that's what they're useful for. So that's other justifications that come. So people try to use even the language of economics by saying that caste systems were intended as forms of specialization of labor. These actually become ways of reinforcing its existence by trying to do that. But it's also important because if you do not create those reinforcements, I mean, if you do not create those jati or different classes within each, then obviously the system will fall apart. And it is important for people to keep that superstructure. And part of that is to graft an economic model or an economic argument on this arbitrary classification of people. Number 6 is dehumanization and stigma, predictably. If you go to many other places, whether it's in the days of slavery, again, because she dwells in slavery, and she says that slavery was in the US for a much longer time than slavery has been abolished, which many people forget. Black people were in slavery in the US for almost 400 years. They've been free for 150, so 250 more years are yet to go, which is equivalent to 1/4 of a millennium, because they've been as free as they were enslaved quite some time. I found that really, really profound. But coming back to what, so caste systems comes with dehumanization and stigmatism. Occupational hierarchy exists. There are assignments about what tasks they might undertake, and these come with dehumanization and stigma. The stigma comes in the form of, so for instance, black people, well, they were in the US, for instance, sometimes you get slave owners asking two black people, one to maintain one rule and the other to maintain something else, and then they would fight each other as part of entertainment, sometimes with death as part of entertainment. She also gives an example under this chapter in which black people who were convinced they were Christians, were made Christians, and would say, look, do you believe that Christ died for you? And the guy would say yes. And this guy, would you ever deny him? And would say no. And you'd whip this guy. The guy was whipped so badly, body was all raw. He died subsequently. But the point was he was trying to prove to these guys that these guys are so easy to convince about things that even under the order, under the pressure of pain, he would not do what he thinks. I do not want you to do. So it's that kind of dehumanization, the stigma of Black people. That stigma still exists. And their view is that even with the structure, the superstructure of slavery, the stigma about Black people and specific attributes still exists, both subconsciously, but in very conscious ways as well. And of course, the dehumanization. You do not have to talk about the dehumanization of Dalit people in India. You all know, a couple of years back, very sad thing happened in India where one person, two girls in a rural village went out all the way to walking in fields. They're sexually assaulted by men of a slightly higher caste. And because they were lower caste people, their family was intimidated to not report this event. So many people, and some lives, women are right at the end of it because caste systems obviously also make patriarchal systems even more harmful to women. And that's part of what this system perpetuates as well. So that does happen. 7, terror as enforcement. There's always violence or the threat of it as the back of a caste system. Why? You must keep low caste people in line. And this is a difficult one to read. As terror as enforcement, one of the things that it gives an example of is where Black people have to learn specific mannerisms. You do not look at a white person straight in the eye during those places. But even in India, there's terror as enforcement, where if a person has some success and they're a person of a lower class, sometimes people actually use that to try and damage the businesses or to actually put them in their place by being told you might have a little bit more money, but that does not make you a class. We need to put you in your place and to remind you not to be uppity, the language of uppity which you hear in Kenya as well in political discussions as well. So terror, difficult chapter to read, but still quite useful when you see it as part of a coherent whole. And the final one is inherent inferiority and inherent superiority. This is troublesome for many, many people because sometimes, regardless of the facts and the superstructure that supports the caste system, there are people who actually believe it. And the hollowness of the concept itself, and the fact that it's lived for 4,000 years in some societies, a few less in others, and it collapses, and it's revived in some societies all the way through too. There are people who actually inherently believe, whether in ethnic terms, in religious terms, or even in caste systems properly. You have people in Europe in the Second World War, regardless of the fact that Jewish people were very successful in some business, and many of them were actually had scruples in the sense that they did their business quite honestly. The belief that all Jewish money was made from theft was widespread in Germany, and it spread. Regardless of that, these guys are inferior, and they have a certain attribute which is not. You hear people, many people still make those claims here. Regardless of what it is, people actually believe that. Even on this continent, there are people who actually believe in the inherent superiority of certain clans, people, families over others. But I'm talking about the fact that in the caste system, there's an inherent belief that if you are an upper caste person, you are superior to a person below you, regardless of what other things they might achieve and all that. And obviously that forms some kind of gatekeeping, because then it's a way of protecting the fragile egos of people who are at the top from the competition that may come from the others. But it is a requirement that those who are at the bottom believe it as well. And if many of them believe it, the superstructure is maintained. And that's part of what Isabel claims is happening here. So those are the 8, the most profound chapter in my view for me, because we all understand stratification system. But when you put it in the order about some of the things, what are the attributes of a classification system? And some are definitely much stronger than others. We see the element of social prejudice and how it can be quote unquote institutionalized by being given certain assumptions and certain attributes, working in a mutually reinforcing way to ensure that a caste system retains for long. I want to finish. So the stratification system that exists actually gets the core logic. In the US, in India, in Germany, while these people thought that Jewish people were inferior, they had no problem. They had no compunction about asking people, Jewish people, to bake the bread in their houses. I mean, for them, do their jewelry, make their boots and stuff like that. So that there are contradictions for a person who's obsessed or has inherited the question of caste. It's such that they don't see it. They live with that so comfortably. It's as if their conscience cannot ask them to actually say that, look, these things are inconsistent with each other. These guys are inferior. How is it that our society depends on them? So for instance, in India, in the caste system and in Hinduism, low caste people, especially the untouchables, are called untouchables for the reason that they handle dead bodies and they do most of the sanitation work related to managing community sanitation. And you know how serious those things can be. You wouldn't have a society exist without them. But these people who are higher caste people still want them to believe that this is where you are fit for in order for that system to be perpetuated. And I think she classifies this. The next chapter after this are actually instances in which you see each and every one of these attributes reinforcing or leading to questions about how they did. One of the things that she did is this experiment that was done, and in that experiment she talks about a study that it's not as if the US had not studied it, and she talks about a couple in the 1933, a black and white couple, both couples. The students, each of them had very high qualifications from Harvard. One is a black couple, and the other obviously white. They decided to come together to try and study the existence of this social stratification system in Mississippi, 1933, in a place called Natchez. And they wrote a book called Caste and Economic System. Social anthropological study of caste and class in the United States in the 1930s. They spent 12 years writing it. It was published in 1948. And here they were questioning the core logic of caste, of caste, global distribution, and they realized that in every sector, in every caste system, there are enforcers or minions, regardless of the fact that they are right at the bottom and they themselves are oppressed. They have an interest in putting lower caste people in their place. The classical movies show this a lot in the Second World War. The Germans were very good, or the Nazis were very good at appointing one person, Jewish person, as the couple, which was the overseer of all the others. And part of what is required of him is to be very brutal with his colleagues by putting them in their place. They say that the caste system tends to have a sentinel at every run. That's on page 244. It was so profound I had to take it up with me. She makes the claim, Isabel makes the claim, I think she stretches it, but she makes the claim that while these two couples, they took a very long time because they did an anthropological, it was very risky. They couldn't even meet because in Mississippi, white people and black people meeting so often was actually not, would raise suspicions. They even say that because they used to meet by collecting, each of them would go to places, their wives would meet in stores, but they wouldn't say hi to each other because obviously that would raise things. Each of them one is getting the structure from the white people, the other is collecting data using anthropological observations and putting together data. Then the two gentlemen would meet on a dirt road somewhere in the guy's truck and then exchange notes and do everything else. And even while they were sending all their notes out by mail, they had to be very careful because a black man sending mail so often would actually grab attention. But the thing that I found is really, really interesting here is that they claim that, look, I went to, while they were meeting, they were actually under observation by the sheriff. So basically telling you that while class systems exist, racism was almost 70 years behind them. Black people were still being, black-white relationships, friendships, even professional ones like these ones were the subject of surveillance in the southern parts of the United States. So let me conclude. I think one chapter that's also very interesting is the epilogue chapter. In the epilogue, she talked about the fact that she has hoped that it will end. It ended in Nazi Germany in 12 years, from 1933 to 1945, thanks to a very brutal war. So she seems to say, why not elsewhere? It can still be ended. In chapter 31, she says that the heart is the last frontier, reminding us that in the end, the edifice of social stratification in the form of caste only exists if we don't examine ourselves, and the heart is the last frontier, which diminishes the power of caste. She has a chapter on shedding the sacred thread, which is quite interesting. That's shedding the sacred thread refers to the fact that in India, higher caste people had a thread, which is the thread of rebirth, showing that you've been, and that's one of the ways, actually found out by speaking to somebody who studied this in India, an institution that actually talks about, protects the rights of Dalits. And he tells me one of the ways that people in India actually try to size each other for which caste you belong to is if you're a gentleman, they, quote unquote, affect as if they're patting you on the back. But they know that if you're a higher caste person, they tend to have a thread, which is called the thread of rebirth. And that they will tell them that you're Brahmin. If they do not find it, then they become a little bit more cautious because they know that you might belong to one of the lower castes. I have to conclude by saying that Isabel is conscious that even in India, caste systems tend to go with color. And yes, the Brahmins are higher, they tend to be lighter, but color alone doesn't always tell you. So it is not a perfect predictor, but in a way, there's an extent to which lightness and colorism is one of these things. It's also visible in the US as well, where colorism tries to do that. But the contaminating effect of caste is so interesting because it says that even when Africans go into the US, the stigma against Black people not being underachievers is such that many Black people, or rather many Africans or people of African origin who go there, try sometimes to prove to the other superior caste, so to speak, that we don't behave like them. We have better manners, or we have better comportment, we are more capable, and they tend to be very and that actually drives a divide between Black people from other parts of the world. In addition to the fact that even other castes, Latinos and others, try as much as possible to reinforce the fact that we are different from your average Black people because you're beneath us. So that fight to be on that run makes everybody a guardian of the caste systems in ways that we do not realize. So thanks. 20 minutes or more. I apologize for taking more time than I should have, but yeah, let me hear what everybody else has to say. Thank you. Any questions or any comments? You can send any of your comments in the message box. I mean, the chat box, which is somewhere on the menu up there. If not, I'll just see who's here, then thank you, and we can wrap up the session or take any final questions. Any questions? People, I can see there are 12 of us. Are there 12 of us? Anyone with a comment? Or should I just ask people to say what they did, what they know about the, I mean, what they feel about the book? Okay, let me start with Brian Mweti. Do you have any comments to make? Brian? Okay. Hazel, there's a guest called Hazel. Hazel, would you like to make a comment about how far you've read and what you got from the book, and what would be like 3 points you'd like to emphasize for us to understand? Folks, we're supposed to have a book club discussion. Anyone? All right. Looks like there's no one. So maybe I'll ask, I'll open it up for one final question, and then maybe we'll close because we're about an hour into the discussion. Should we?
I can share a comment.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Who's that?
Okay. Hazel.
Okay, fine, Hazel. Please go ahead. Oh, I have a couple.
And thanks for allowing me to crash this meeting. It was really good. I like your overview. I'll be a little bit controversial regarding your statement, and I felt like a lot of the feedback that I saw about the book, particularly from the Black community, be it Black, Brown, is whether the book was for everyone. I felt the book was more specific to her addressing what is going on in the US. I felt she was writing to the choir, and that a hardliner Republican or a conservative would have not passed the beginning of the book to dive into the sections that you addressed that were really the meat of the conversation. I felt, and it'll be good to hear other people's thoughts. because it's difficult for an author to separate her emotions or his emotions from what they believe. I felt like she came into the book and she believed something, and she ran with what she believed, and then added the additional coloring to drive the conversation. Specific to your statement on class structure and caste, there's a really good interview that the senior Rothschilds member, where the Rothschilds are the most successful banking family in Europe, addressed that despite the fact that they have the economic and political access that they have, that the presence of caste is evident to them relative to the House of Windsor being descendants of Germany. And it then brings into light the question of the gray area. Is it just a black and white story, or are there white people who actually experience the caste system irrespective of the successes that they bring to the table? So that was just something I wanted to share with the group. And then coming closer to home, I was surprised when I was in northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia, about the Borana caste system. And if anybody's interested, you should, in this whole concept of caste and how it's segmented and how it's reviewed, the Borana culture brings a really, really interesting perspective on that. Yeah, that was pretty much it.
Thank you very much, Hazel. Let me have other people. I saw Linda. Linda had her hands up. Linda had her hands up, so let me hear her. Linda, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very comprehensive overview. Mine is just to mention that it does seem that we have castes, as much as we do not classify them as such, even in our very own nation, that castes do exist, even without us necessarily mentioning it. And it's interesting that it's not just along the lines of religion, but rather it's along the lines of separating the haves and the haves not. And I don't know why that happens so much in society. I think for me, what I'm trying to juggle in my mind is, do we have to have separation systems amongst us? Is it of essence? I mean, because if you look at the world over, it would seem that we are always having this way of ensuring that there are people who are more this than that, you know. And even if you look at our nation, we do have that. I mean, we are calling it we have deep state, which is the untouchables and things like that. So in every society, it would seem that this is there, even if it's not talked about. But I guess for me, the question is why is it so necessary? Why are people so keen on it? Why can't we have a society that allows people to be the best they can be, whoever you are, wherever you come from? Why don't we make the world a fair playground? Because so long as there are castes, I mean, you see, like today in our political field, if you look at it, people say if you're not part of deep state, you have nothing that's coming for you. So those are just some thoughts that are coming along my mind, even as I hear the conversations that are ongoing with this. Yeah, that's my contribution.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. Thanks, Hazel. There are a couple of questions here, but let me first respond to Hazel. It's true, Hazel, that if you read it actually, and if you look at the chapter, it's as if Isabel already had this theory up, and she just looked for the evidence. But I think one of the other things that fueled, and she claims it in the book, this was that the election of Donald Trump and what people think of as the very naked arguments by his supporters about the fact that, look, this is a white country and we need to put ourselves back to owning our country. That very naked primordialism, which is we are superior to other people and our country is being taken over, especially after Obama's election. is something that definitely excited, and part of been her concern, because she uses that to actually confirm the fact that caste systems don't fall without those who are part of it actually resisting it. And it's very easy to create political mobilization by saying, look, we are putting people, there's the same way Hitler did that, or the Nazis, let me say Nazis, it wasn't just Hitler, did that. So I agree that she was preaching to the choir. And my view about that is it's also true. But I think what Isabel, and I speak for her here to be circumspect, but what she's trying to say is I'm sure she must have debated that political thing and said, look, caste systems rely on us using the language and the temperament that they want us to expose. I mean, they want us to show, to perpetuate themselves. And part of your resistance is to actually say that, look, if I make you uncomfortable, so be it. But let's have a conversation about what I think is a imposition that is not just, and also that has no merits behind everything else. So I guess that's one of the things that I think comes out there. They're white people. I mean, in the question that. In the examples that she gives, and they're it's elaborate actually, the book is stories and also the superstructure, which is basically her methodological approach. Is if you look at that, she says, I gave the example of the Jews, white people as well who saw that thing. There are still people who actually believe, well, they were not going to actually marshal people into the sad camps, concentration camps, but there are still people with very deep-seated hatred of Jews. And it's not just people in Europe. It isn't. I mean, I've sat in WhatsApp groups in which people send messages about the most radical things said about the Jews. For whatever reason, they have it. And they have a belief that for some reason, Jews are responsible. You know, these global conspiracy theories which people build around why these people should be treated differently. They're dangerous, they're always trying to control the world and some of that. Regardless of what evidence exists for it, or whether it's been examined, there's a lot of received wisdom around why caste systems should exist as they do. Even religions, even the Abrahamic religions, all of them have proclamations which you can actually say are anti-Black people. That's a fact. Africans are uncomfortable with it, but it's true. So I think the idea that caste systems exist outside just black-white, I think this book is a feat with examples around the US, because I think she wanted to lay the foundation and then use it to analyze existing contemporary problems and all that. She mentions a lot about lynching in the US and that language of putting Black people in their place, which you still see in very many places here. For instance, she didn't mention that directly, but you remember when Obama came in, the people who were questioning his grades, this guy was the president of Harvard Law Review. Nobody's going to elect you as president of Harvard Law Review unless you're leading in class. That's one. Two, the Bata movement, which was completely preposterous, but was given a lot of fuel by people who were just, I mean, of course, some Kenyans also participated in it, whatever their motivation might have been. But the point about that, what some of the things that are building is there's no such thing as Black excellence. It cannot be. It's fake. So when a guy is like this, we must find something about him that is unrelated to stuff like that. So that stuff does exist. And I think caste systems, I mean, if you go to India, it's mostly a Caucasian race. But caste systems exist as well. They will find reasons for caste systems to exist. And Jewish people have had the brunt of it in Europe based on other forms. But the establishment of a physical caste system that the Nazis did, remember, Hitler won elections in 1933, right? 32, right? No, 33. In 4 months, German people were beating up Jews in the streets. They didn't have to be told, like, go beat them up, but they could tell the rhetoric of the language. I mean, the rhetoric of the campaign, of the political campaigns and the zeitgeist, basically that, look, it'll be okay for us to get away with this. She also mentions the example about Albert Einstein, who escaped the skin of his teeth, came to the US, and as soon as he was there, within a year, was disillusioned. Says, look, I escaped from Europe, but what I see here is typically a caste system as atrocious, or rather executing atrocities, similar to what I was seeing in Europe a couple of years back. So that's basically an experience. But of course, the experience of Jewish people in 1933 all the way to 1945 when the war ended is central to part of our arguments in here. Linda, why are people keen on these differences? Look, this is what my notes show me. My view is, and I argue as well, because I think that the human being is very status conscious. Many people have no problem with you questioning something, but if they see you questioning something in a way that makes them lose face, that tends to bother them. And so my view is that caste systems are a social technology that rigs success for a given number of people. There are social technology, there are mechanism of rigging success for some people and their kids perpetually. That's the attempt that they're making, so that you can place them right at the top and ensure that they have privileges that do not come with any merit. You cannot change the basis of it, and that they therefore justify their existence in that specific way. And remember, this is supposed to be permanent, reinforced by those 3A. And one of the ways to make sure that it is not questionable is to cast us in guilt by saying it's God ordained. So if you're questioning it, obviously that means it's you're questioning God as well. And then of course it's heritable, meaning that you preserve whatever that exists. Endogamous. So all those things actually work towards reinforcing it. So it's a way of rigging social success in my view. And Isabel calls the bluff by saying, look, one of the things that worried her, and actually she mentioned it after she's mentioned the 8 attributes of a caste system, is if you look at one of the chapters she starts with chapters by a guy called Angus Deaton, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, I think in 2016. And the guy found out that middle-aged white people in the US was seeing for the first time since records were being collected a decline in life expectancy. And many of them were suffering from depression, suicide, and drug overdose, because there was the opioid, the pandemic of opioids had actually caught up, and mostly in white places and places where people do not have a lot of economic power. And the language that has been used to treat it or to deal with it as policy is completely different from the same language that was used in the mid-80s and early 90s when crack cocaine was mostly devastating Black communities. She mentions that. That will make very uncomfortable reading for, you're right, Republicans and people who have certain views that these issues should not be discussed because slavery ended 150 years ago, and obviously we should not be perpetuating these differences and stuff like that. It's uncomfortable reading, but you can actually tell. But what she says is sometimes it is this lower level white people who will fail to support public sector investments such as health systems, which would actually make them better, because their belief is all these systems only help. All these systems only help Black people and minorities, which I find interesting. She mentions a specific case in Kentucky where certain governors, because of, you all know about Obamacare, I don't have to go into the politics of it, but you understood that the way to preserve its formation, governors and every state was allowed to opt in. And the federal government would actually subsidize part of that cost. Whatever you read it, whether it was because they are completely opposed to government systems, or whether it was some specific animus towards Obama and the Democrats, there are people in states that are very poor in the US, and they tend to be, who are also white. It is in their interest to have public sector investments in health and the systems that actually enable them to have hope or to be able to do well. But they reject it primarily because there was stigma to the name Obamacare. So that they even say about a guy here who was suffering cancer that was treatable, refused to actually accept it or support it. So that their self-interest can be subordinated to an ideology of caste and differences. Or, in the service of an ideology, the belief is that only Black people benefit, even if the evidence shows actually that 3/4 of all claims of what are called welfare do not go to Black people. But that caste system reinforces that. She makes the idea far too strongly, and I agree with Hazel, that would make some people very, very uncomfortable. But that's it. So that kind of reading creates a sense of we are superior, and many people, regardless of what people say, regardless of what the US formation says, not many people believe that all men are created equally. Or it is not self-evident to every person. Some people simply believe it. I will end with an example about dehumanization and stigma, and purity and pollution. So I can't remember which state it was, but a little league basketball, baseball team of elementary school students. There were 9. They won the state championship for baseball. In the team was one black boy. And part of their reward was to be allowed to go for a picnic in the local pool, local state-provided pool, local government pool. I mean, swimming pool, so that they could paddle in this water and all that. When they went in with this little black boy, he couldn't be allowed to actually access a public facility. So while the other students were celebrating and having a picnic inside the premises, he stayed out, and his teachers kept him out there, partly because they couldn't allow it. Finally, when he was allowed to come in, the other parents took their kids out of the pool, the concept of purity. And among the things that then happened was, the boy felt so bad. This is a 9-year-old. This is in the 50s. He felt so bad that he failed to come with his team members and actually walked back home on his own. The injustice is so stark that even a 9-year-old boy can tell with his conscience this is wrong. How adults envisage such thing and actually support it is one of the things. For me, I'm most embarrassed for those teachers because they failed to protect this boy. But more importantly, then they should have chosen a place that did not. Because I think she says that thing probably never escaped the eyes of that boy. I mean, the mind of that boy. Obviously, in his formative years, it's extremely profound for a child. It must have been painful for him. You worked in the team all the year, so we were equals. But when it comes to this and all that, that's one. The second one, where what they did was that there were states in the US after the great case of Brown versus Board of Education that chose to close public schools than actually have school facilities shared between black kids and white kids. So she doesn't use this word, but I think hatred and what the belief in inherent superiority, I call it primordialism, can be so strong that people are prepared to damage themselves to actually make their point home. Our superiority and our fixation with looking posh, looking better than others, is a human condition that, when pushed forward by caste, can actually lead to a pathology. She did not use those words, but I use those words because I think that's what it gave me. The number of examples she puts in here, including others regarding lynching, a boy who was also lynched because he sent a Christmas card to a white girl that he was working with in the same place and stuff like that. In addition to the fact that white women were conditioned to always know that if anything happened, they can always accuse a black man of having made a pass at them. And that would often lead to the man's death because the crowd would simply come and they'd be tortured before they actually lynched. So that infrastructure of casteism, which she says exists, it's not as if injustices don't exist somewhere, but she gives this elaborate superstructure that supports casteism, and it infects every area of society, including police, even showing here that some black police officers actually led to the death of a man because they handcuffed him. Black driver, there were 4 of them, 3 of them were blacks. But they're conditioned to the view that when we are dealing with black people, we need to show that we are so tough on them that they actually handcuffed this guy, they put him in the trunk of the car, and they were driving so fast that he was banging his head on both sides. Eventually, of course, the guy died. And they were acquitted, but the argument they were making is we enforce the law in this way because we enforce it for everybody else. So justice systems, people's popular language, and even social interactions between private people are conditioned by what might exist as a caste system, regardless of the fact that some laws say certain things, and also the fact that slavery in the US died in a very expensive way, in which 750,000 people lost their lives in 1863. Thanks, guys. So that's it. I see Hussein has mentioned something, interjection. Some caste dictates for parents to raise girls, ladies to be best suited for marriage, offer dowry to men instead of men paying for women as it is right of women in exchange for marriage consummation. Okay, a point. And then Paul Wakanya mentions that caste is a master with so many servants spread across different societies. I agree with you. A back office code running and controlling the front office, which is the society. That's very, very true. That's a good metaphor actually for it. I mean, your language would match the language of Isabel. She has fantastic ways of putting metaphors. It's very fine reading. That's some of the aspects I understand Isabel was trying to bring up. You're right, Paul. You're very right. Stephen says here that I was amazed to learn that the traditionally thought of caste system to be Indian can be superimposed on other districts. Not even superimposed. They actually have, the caste system is a franchise, and every society buys a little bit of it, in which maybe some of them, the most stringent ones, have all the 8 attributes. Some of them just have these attributes. So sometimes in social prejudice, some people believe, and the point about it is, some people actually believe that their race is superior to others. It's not a fiction to them. They actually think it's true. It's a lie, but they actually think it's true. The same way that somebody can believe that my shirt is yellow. It's any other color but yellow. And someone can actually believe that they're. So it's just that subjective, but it can be so deeply felt that actually its actions, or rather its consumption, informs the way people actually do and think things fast. The example she gave finally was that, sorry, I keep talking about finally, but the one example she gave was Black people were so conditioned to subordination that even in Mississippi, when they owned a house and you rented your house, this is 1930s, you rent your house, so you're a landlord and you rent your house out to a white person. You go through the back door to meet them. You cannot go through your front door because that would show your master. Unbelievable. Unbelievable social norms conditioned by something we can't see, we can't feel, and we can't touch. So you're right, Steve. And Hazel says here that, Linda, I think humans are so kind yet so cruel because man is still mostly in his animal state. Okay, let's get out of that state very, very quickly. I don't have other questions. Oh, Hussein says here, did you check which religion opposed most and fought against any form of discrimination based on any non-segregation basis? No, I haven't, and she hasn't said it. But the interesting thing about it, and she mentions here, the interesting thing about religion is that some of the strongest abolition people were actually Christians, and some of the biggest fighters for the maintenance of slavery claimed to be Christians as well. So yes, it's about how people can read scripture to justify one thing or the other. But you're right, it's something that we need to actually objectively determine. Then Noah says here, thanks, I haven't read the book yet, but from your overview, I draw many comparisons with Kenyan theory, stratified society, though nuanced precisely. Yes, so the rest is basically, Tim suggests, do you believe that the Indian caste system was incorporated into the class system in colonial Kenya? No. Colonial Kenya just has its own class system as well, caste system, which was, it's a softer form of casteism. But Black people were placed in their places, obviously at the bottom of the line, and then it also came with occupational specialization. So, because Asians did not own land, they were allowed to be traders, and the ones who could get that. So that trading effect, Black people were only physical laborers or manual laborers or physical laborers. Over time, of course, they started to allow castes to do that. You know that right up to the 1950s, Black people were not allowed without permission to actually grow coffee or tea, because those were considered crops that only white people could take care of, even if the labor that they used to take care of it was mostly African labor. So what this book has taught me is not think, let's not hear caste and think Indian or Hindu. People borrow from it. Let's think of caste as a social technology in which one class, one family, one group of people, one ethnicity, or one religion tries to rig social structures for their own success. That's it. And remember, the reason class is different from caste is that caste has these 8 features of permanency, heritability, and endogamy. Purity, occupational hierarchy, dehumanization, terrors, enforcement, and inherent inferiority. Those 8. Class systems actually allow, sometimes they're difficult, but class systems sometimes allow the children of poor people to actually get to be top class, start to behave in ways that they suggest that other people are. So there's There's circulation, minimal, but there's circulation in class. Caste systems are permanent and they're supposed to be embedded forever in history. Yes, Linda asks, so is caste a power play and religion is used to push it because we do not necessarily question religion? I think so too. I mean, in religious society, of course, even most books, most social orders were created through some kind of religious structure. So to allude to God and a superior being as having endorsed caste is a cheap trick, if I may use that, to explain that it's self-evident that, look, this is something that God approves. Because to treat other lives as cheaply, and actually sometimes to mete out violence in them, requires, at least for a person of conscience, to try and justify that and all that. But more importantly, my view about referring to God is because even in India, people in the lowest class are actually about 20%. And my view is if they refuse to play ball, the caste system will collapse. So you need to reinforce, whether through terror, endogamy, heritability, and God ordination, and dehumanization and stigma. But if, say, those people refuse to play God, it wouldn't. I'd like to recommend to all of you, I'd like to recommend to all of us a book. It's called, the book is called Caste by an Indian author. It's called Mulk Rajanand. The book was written in 1920s. And it's called Untouchable. It's an Indian classic. It's a book I read in 2010. I was visiting India. I went into a bookstore. And then a guy told me, look, here is the link. So I was in India. Then I went into a bookstore. And then so I've provided the link right up there. Please copy it. But you see the book. And it talks about one day in the life of a lower caste person who does the sanitation work. And some of the work they do is gruesome. Society cannot do without them. But these same people actually despise them, which is the contradiction in itself and part of the reason why this caste system cannot survive. So I've sent the link to a review I wrote about the book. I've sent the link in the chat box. So if you can look at it and see whether you'd like to read that, that would be fine for you. So ladies and gentlemen, I need to close because we have 10 minutes to go. I don't know if anybody has any question or anything else you'd like to say. We appreciate your feedback. But the function of today was actually just to have an inaugural book club. We assume that you've done the reading. If you haven't, that's still okay. Please do read it. If you have any questions for us, you can ask us. We'll be glad to answer. In January, we'll have another book reading. What we try to do is, for the purposes of making this fairly a discussion and not just a lecture from me, because I don't want to do that, we'll try and make sure that we keep these to 40 people. So what we'll do is we'll send a notice very early. And then once we send the notice, we'll have the first 40 people who confirm, members and non-members of the IEA, and we'll open it up. That way allows us for us to keep, but we intend to read at least a book a month and reflect upon what its policy choices mean for Kenya. And my view, this is a book that, in my view, we should do two things. We should get a copy and send to everyone in the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and the National Commission on Integration. National Commission on Integration and NCIC, whatever that means, right? Sorry, I've been speaking for too long, I forget. National NCICs, National whatever, an Integration Commission. So that's basically it. Send a copy to each one of them, and perhaps everybody in the cabinet, because Kenya is also struggling with bringing together people and creating cooperation within a new constitutional orders, but simply to know that one of the things that laws should do is to try as much as possible, and public policy should try as much as possible to break down anything that looks like castes, which create permanent barriers and create different different outcomes for national cohesion and integration commission. Thank you very much, team. So that's one. Now, I need to tell you why this book is the one we chose. Well, it was Barack Obama's summer reading list for this year, and Barack Obama is a very important guy, should I say. But that aside, the IEA has been struggling with trying to build a mechanism for measuring prejudice in every society. And so this book, part of what it reminds us of, actually, it's an ongoing thing. Is there a way we can, the way we measure, say, GDP, we measure corruption levels, they're not perfect systems, but is there a way to measure that? Because if things cannot be measured, it is difficult, one, to have data-based and fact-based and empirical discussions around what they mean and whether they are really important or not. Because some people say if you can't measure it, obviously, it's difficult to bring it under traction. And is prejudice necessarily an issue? And we think that social stratification, obviously, are things that are the results of prejudice. So it's something that the IEA is struggling with. We are doing some conceptualization of a concept. And over time, I think we'll get something that we'll be able to. So that's part of why we think that building caste systems is it. And we think that castes are extreme forms of prejudice. I think it is possible to draw something that allows us to say at every level, whether we use the 8 attributes or whether we use other forms of measurement, that would be it. So, ladies and gentlemen, in January, we'll have another book. Now, this one might be very different because we've got a book to which staff of the IEA were contributed. It's called Youth Quick. It's written by a guy called Edward Pace. The book is called Youth Quick. And I've written the name there, right there. And what he'll do is we've asked him to consider actually, so instead of my speaking like we did today, traditional book clubs actually get the author and ask the author to explain what it is he's trying to write and give each and every one of us an opportunity to ask questions of him. So look for that book. If you can find a digital copy, fine. Others, it was just launched last week on 16th. It was launched last week on 7th of this month. So it's fairly new, but it's describing population movement in Africa, what population factors mean in Africa, demography. So it's got a demographic and economic focus, political and social as well, going through African countries to assess actually what's happening to the population. He's done a sound job. I gave a blurb to the book, which are saying that, look, if there's one book to read about Africa's development and population, I think this is it. I meant that because I got an early opportunity to read some of the copies. So we will have it in January, maybe second or third week. We still need to do that. So it will be an open webinar. So look for the book, but the most important thing is we'll have him. So he'll explain what it is for us, and it will be far more different from what the lecture that I've given you today. But that stated, I think at the Institute of Economic Affairs, this is our final webinar of the year. We've held 41 of them. I'd like to thank all of you who've come in today and supported. Oh, okay. There's a chart with IEA Kenya. My colleague has just mentioned to me that there's a chart, and that chart would be. When is it, Anna? Please tell us when it is. Can you just take the mic and tell us when it is, Anna? Anna, you sent me a message. Can you just tell us when is the tweet chat? Okay, fine. Looks like she doesn't. Okay, so what I mean is that we'll have that in January. So please just look out for it. If you follow us on social media, and after today, we have some emails for some of you to confirm. We'd invite you to that meeting. It's a fascinating book to read. I'd like to thank you for being patient with us, following IEA's work, and continuing to encourage us in the ways that we do. Function of the IEA is to elevate the quality of public debate on most of these issues, to create public education, but also to point you out to ways in which we build a democratic culture in Kenya by actually having debate on important questions, discussions, informed discussions on important questions. So thank you very much, and happy holidays. And for those who celebrate Christmas, happy Christmas as well. And for the rest of you, happy New Year, and hope to see you next year. Thanks a lot. Take care of yourselves, guys.